So hi everyone, welcome to the Hoboken Public Library STEM Careers Discussion Series. So this is the fourth and final panel in our spring and summer series. My name is Bernadette Patino and I'm a librarian here at the Hoboken Public Library. I'm part of the Information and Digital Services Department and the Access Services Department. So we're really thankful for our two panelists to be here today. And both of them come from different parts of the medical field. They conduct research in their respective fields. And today they will share about why they decided to pursue a STEM career, how they entered their field, their experiences in school and professionally, and advice that they have for students who are interested to enter a STEM career. So to briefly introduce our panelists tonight, we have here with us John Lozada, who is an MD PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota and is a member of the Association of Filipino Scientists of America. And we have Angelica Patino, who is a neuroscientist at Beacon Biosignals, a biotech company based in Boston, Massachusetts. So with that, I'll give the floor to our first presenter. John, take it away.
Great. Hopefully you can start seeing my screen now, and hopefully I don't ramble on too long. But yeah, I'll be talking about my path as a physician scientist. So as Bernadette said, I am pursuing my MD PhD right now at the University of Minnesota. And so I'll go over what it has meant to me and how I've gotten to this stage so far. So where am I right now? I'm currently starting my second year of medical school at the University of Minnesota. And for those of you that don't know what an MD PhD is, it's quite a long path where you pursue both a medical degree and a PhD at the same time in a combined manner. So I'll talk about that a bit later, but I still have a long way to go. I still have to do my PhD, finish med school, do residency and fellowship, and start my own lab and all that fun stuff. So I'm still here for a while. So what is a physician scientist though? So a physician scientist is essentially an individual with an MD or DO degree, with or without other graduate degrees, for whom research and discovery are at least a major commitment. We are well prepared to detect new threats to human disease, to human health, and develop potential new therapies, treatments, or means of prevention. So a bit more about my background. I was actually born in the Philippines, and I ended up moving to New Jersey when I was around 4 years old, growing up in New Milford. So for those of you that know or may not know, that's a pretty Filipino dense community. So a lot of what I saw and a lot of what I think I'd end up being doing is I thought maybe I would become a nurse like a lot of my cousins and aunts, or an accountant or engineer, similarly like a lot of my relatives there, and a lot of what I saw amongst the other Filipinos in my community. But as I was growing up, I, ended up being more interested in the medical field, partly because I had family with disease. So it was always like trying to help take care of people, trying to tackle disease. And also there was that aspect of, the medical field pays decently well. And throughout elementary and middle school, I was like, okay, I'm getting good grades. Maybe we can aim a bit higher above a nurse. Maybe let's try becoming a doctor. So my first step was actually going to BCA or Bergen County Academies, specifically in their medical science academy. And that ended up training me pretty well and preparing me for my future kind of endeavors. So yeah, for those of you, to give some context about how BCA is set up, we have all different academies, medical field, engineering, business, even culinary, so on and so forth. And they really try and prepare us with like college-like courses or more field-specific courses to pursue, whatever it is that we want in that field. But going into this and really I having no one in my family that was a doctor, or not knowing many doctors in general, I was like, how do I even start and how do I even become a doctor in general? Um, and the main thing we know going into this is just that getting into med school is very hard. There's a lot of competition. It requires a lot of money and also a lot of resources. So I was always kind of having the mindset of strategizing, stacking my resume, going to the best college I can, and finding the thing that makes me stand out amongst other applicants. So luckily enough for me, that was research. Because my high school had a lot of opportunities to do research ourselves, like independent research where we have our own projects and stuff like that. So this picture is actually of a few people in my class who I was friends with back in high school. So yeah, I started research in high school and I ended up falling in love with it. Um, my high school project at BUCA was essentially building a mousetrap for cancer cells, which we can implant into cancer patients. And hopefully the goal was to stop metastases and prevent recurrence. And while I love the idea, you know, it did end up making me think, oh, this is something I could do in the future. And I was rather successful at my, kind of in terms of accomplishments when it came to this project and research in general, winning awards at both regional science fairs and national and international science fairs as well. So I was like, oh, I really love research. How can I get, even more experience? So during high school, I think it was my junior year, I ended up applying for a high school summer student program at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, which for those of you that don't know, is actually one of the best cancer centers in the entire world. So my research was focused on looking for mutations in rare cancers that may help us diagnose and treat those cancers. And typically, how we end up doing this is we get a patient, we end up classifying their cancer, taking biopsies, and then sending that off for sequencing. And then, we determine what mutations are there and what we can use for things like diagnosis or targeted therapies. So that got me into the realm of genomics and also precision cancer therapies. I ended up really loving cancer, so I stayed with it. And so the next part was really finding where I fit in the cancer space. And a lot of this was pretty much just me during undergrad at the University of Rochester. So the other two opportunities for research I pursued were at Dana-Farber and Harvard Medical School, as well as my college's medical center. So at Dana-Farber, I was really focused on using gene editing, specifically CRISPR, to identify things that are related to cancer processes. And I ended up applying those techniques that I learned there to study immune responses against cancer during my undergrad. So I ended up really loving the intersection of the two. And so my niche was really to use genomics, things like CRISPR editing, sequencing, stuff like that, to supercharge the immune system against cancer. And so now my project for my PhD is really focused on, again, supercharging the immune system against cancer. So right now in the clinic, or what we're trying to get into clinic, is essentially immune-based therapies wherein we take out blood samples from patients themselves, isolate their immune cells, and then grow them up and engineer them so that they have enhanced function against attacking cancer cells. And then we deliver them back into patients as forms of living drugs. So these cells continue to multiply within patients and act to recognize and kill the cancer cells. So the end goal for me really is to engineer our immune cells to fight cancer better. And hopefully that will give us long-lasting living drugs to cure cancer and also prevent recurrence, while at the same time trying to lessen the systemic side effects that we see with things like chemotherapy that can be rather toxic to patients. Like what you see is typically patients losing a lot of weight or their hair falling out, stuff like that. So we really want to try and minimize their pain so that we can give them a better quality of life while at the same time extending the length of life for them. So I fell in love with research and I still wanted to become a doctor. So I was just like, how do I become both? So to apply for an MD PhD program, the main things you need to have are just a lot of research, extracurriculars that show your leadership, and clinical shadowing and volunteer experience. For me, that ended up being in college, a president of my Filipino culture club, and editor-in-chief of the undergrad research journal over at the University of Rochester. Clinical shadowing was just me shadowing a bunch of oncologists. Similarly for volunteering, me just doing the basic hospital volunteering. And of course, MCAT and GPA. So what it takes to actually apply. So applying to MD PhD is very similar to normal med school applications. We just click a specific button on the AMCLAS application to state that we're interested in applying to the school's MD PhD program. And essentially it's the same process, but more essays and more interviews as well. And what is an MD PhD program specifically? It combines both the MD and PhD graduate programs into one, and it typically takes 7 to 9 years. So the typical structure for it is the first 2 years of med school, then your PhD, so 3 to 5 years typically, and then you finish the last 2 years of med school. And I will note that a pro of this is that most, if not all, programs are fully funded. So you have free medical school and also get paid to go to school all 8 years. And why I'm doing this. So as I said before, I really love doing the medical side of things. I love seeing the patients because they ended up motivating me to do research and discover things that can help improve them. And I love doing research, watching my discoveries turn into things that can actually help patients in the end. And another thing is that I hopefully am good at both. I think we'll see how that ends up turning out once I'm actually a fully fledged physician scientist. But yeah, it's something that I found a lot of success in so far and a lot of fun in. So my advice for all of you here right now and those of you that end up watching this recording is find something you both love doing and are good at, because that makes the job a lot easier and more fun. And growing up, I always thought of there being kind of a glass ceiling for me, since I didn't see any Filipinos or anyone that looked like me becoming a doctor or a scientist, and especially not both. So don't let these kind of preconceived glass ceilings stop you. Dreaming of something more is always a good thing. I will say that the path becomes harder since you might lack the resources or knowledge, but at the end of the day, it's easy enough to look for them, especially with the internet now. And another thing is just strategize. What do you need to do to achieve your goals? But the first step is always, what are your goals in general? So exploration is key in that regard. And that's it for me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, John. Very sound advice. I'm sure some folks might have more follow-up questions about that, but thank you for sharing about your research. And yeah, I know you're only a couple of years into your program, so best of luck with the rest of the years that you have to go. But that's really exciting research you're already doing. And yes, so next, I'll give the floor to you, Angelica.
Okay, can you guys see my screen? Okay,
Yes.
great. So as Bernadette mentioned, I am a neuroscientist at a company in the Boston area called Beacon Biosignals. And I didn't really know about the neuroscience field when I sort of started all of this. So this is sort of my journey into becoming a neuroscientist. So yeah, like high school for me was a very, very long time ago, more than 10 years ago. And just, thinking back, I was always a good student in high school, taking so many AP classes, doing some extracurricular activities, but not really going much beyond that. It was a very typical, I guess I would say, high school experience, but, being so focused on academics. And during that time, I was really kind of stuck in this bubble. I kind of stayed within this bubble that I didn't really seek anything beyond just the pure academics. And that's really interesting. Like when John shared that he had done a lot of research while in high school, I think that's really amazing that he knew those opportunities were out there and pursued them. But in my case, I was really just so focused academically. I was always told that, doing well in school is all you need to do, but there's really more to it than just school. So I really stayed within this bubble. And when I applied for college and preparing for applying for college is, when I only realized that, oh, like I really need to do more than just doing well in school. So when I decided to apply for college, I really didn't know what to major in because, I was one of those students that was kind of, trying to get A's in everything, whether it was in the humanities courses or in the science courses. So I really thought that I could have gone into any area. But, I was always really interested in biology. I was good at math and, engineering sounded cool and fancy. So I was like, oh, how about I just study biomedical engineering as kind of a combination of all these different fields. So that was really interesting to sort of make that choice based on some preconceived notions because I didn't really fully understand what it meant to really be an engineer when I first started. So, while I was in engineering school, I tried to do a lot of different research experiences. So this is the time when I started thinking about doing research. I did some research, related to doing like using lasers or doing some robotics. And honestly, I really didn't like any of it. I found it to be interesting, but not something that I wanted to do long term. So I was thinking more about what I was interested in. I recently had read a book at that time about the brain, and I was sort of really inspired to learn more about the brain. So then when I was applying for summer research internship programs, I decided to focus on programs within neuroscience. So then luckily, I was able to do a program at Northwestern University. And in this program, it was called the Summer Internships in Neural Engineering. So it was really focused on studying the brain. And in this project that I did, it was pretty interesting where we basically studied the basic biology of the spinal cord, basically using an electrode to record voltage signals from the spinal cord, and then using various stimulation modalities to understand how these cells and neural signals were interacting and being produced. So from that, I learned like studying the brain, studying the nervous system is really cool. So I sort of started to continue on that path and seek more research opportunities in that area. So then I found another research program at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, which is in Japan. And then in that project, I learned a technique called two-photon imaging. So basically using a mini microscope to image individual neurons in the brain, and you can actually understand the signaling pathways of those individual neurons through this imaging modality. And then from these experiences, I realized I think I'm probably more of a scientist than an engineer. And I also realized that through this research, I really wanted to understand the brain and pursue this field of neuroscience. So at my school, it was a pretty small engineering, science, and math school. And the majority of students, probably 80% of students, go straight to work. And maybe only 20% of them go to graduate school. So my original plan was to do research for a year after finishing my undergraduate studies and then apply to a PhD program. But then since all my classmates were, all getting job offers while I was in my senior year of college, I thought, maybe I should try to apply for jobs as well. So then when I applied for jobs, I focused on jobs specifically within the neuroscience field. So within my STEM career, I've really focused specifically on neuroscience research. And a lot of the applications of the research was specifically using a technique called electroencephalography, or EEG, which is basically reading the brain signals and trying to understand the brain dynamics through these brain signals. And by understanding these brain signals, we can better understand underlying brain diseases and the mechanisms of those diseases, and also developing treatments to help patients with these brain diseases. So the first job that I actually got was at Pfizer. And at Pfizer, I was a research scientist, basically using preclinical models of disease, trying to understand basic mechanisms of the brain in these particular diseases, and trying to also understand how different drugs can improve some features of the diseases within the brain. When I was at Novartis, I did something very similar. And I guess what was new about this particular role was that I really had to apply my knowledge in data science and in computer programming. In this particular role, it was really unique in that I had to really sort of ramp up my programming skills to be able to do the job and to understand how to analyze these brain signals. I moved on to another company called Alkermes, and I really took all of my experiences and applied them to this particular job. And what was really cool about this position was that I was part of a project where we actually developed a drug that was used to treat a sleep disorder called narcolepsy. So it was really cool to be able to take all these experiences and actually help a project actually develop a real treatment for a real disease. And the clinical trials for that particular compound are actually starting fairly soon. While I was at Alkermes, I also was able to pursue my master's degree through the University of Oxford. And in this particular program, I was able to really focus on sleep medicine, trying to understand how various features of sleep impact neuropsychological and neurodegenerative disorders. So it's really this interesting sort of modality in EEG, being able to look at the effects of sleep and the effects of just these basic brain signals on these different disorders to try to understand how we can better diagnose these disorders, and also to understand different biomarkers that we can use to help understand whether treatments are improving these disorders. And in my current job at Beacon Biosignals, it's really a huge transition for me in which I'm really focusing more on clinical neuroscience, where it's all basically focused on data from patients. And from these data from patients, we're trying to basically use various advanced mathematical techniques and machine learning techniques to decode these complex brain signals to further understand how we can use those brain signals to understand the diseases and also to help better treat these disorders. So from all my experiences, I think what I've learned are a few key lessons. So first, when we talk about studying STEM, it's not only about studying, it's also really about experiencing what STEM is like, actually doing research, actually taking action and applying the theory to an actual problem. So my big advice is to find out what's out there and go for it. As a high school student, there are a lot of opportunities available to you for research. There's a lot of paid internship programs that some local universities and colleges put together, where high school students can actually come to the university and do research. There's also a lot of programs, designed for helping young students get experience in STEM. Those can be through local communities, within your local community, or again, within colleges. So you have to really do your research, like John said, strategize, and try to find out what opportunities are out there and just go for it. The other thing too is to really explore and discover what you're into. There's so many aspects of STEM, whether it's, doing engineering or doing science or, going into biology, chemistry, really understanding all these different fields. There's so many things out there. So what you can do as a young student is to really try a lot of new things and lean into your strengths and really master new skills along the way. And as you go through this process, try to reflect on what your experiences are. Try to understand, okay, did I enjoy that research experience, or did I enjoy learning this particular skill, or did I not like it? And try to build upon your experience and build upon your understanding so you can actually find something that you enjoy doing. It's a real process to kind of come to that point. So you have to really put in the work and go through those experiences. The next thing is that try to find your communities, because doing STEM, it's not just a study, it's not just the research, it's really about the people that you're around. Sometimes you don't like a particular research experience, maybe because the people that you're working with really weren't that fun. And maybe you can go out and try to find, fun research and fun people to be around, and then you can really enjoy, doing your research and doing this type of work. So really also try to find the people, again, that you'll have fun with, and these people really become your mentors along the way, and they really become the people that support you in the end. And ultimately, always be kind to everybody that you work with, because you'll always see them again at some point in the future. You'll never know. So try to build that network even when you're young. You can start doing that, and also stay connected to the people that you connect with. Again, because if you're working in these different communities within STEM, you never know when you're going to find your next research opportunity or your next job. So staying connected to these people and really, being actual friends with them helps a lot along the way. And also, it also helps you have fun in the process. So I think that's all I have for now.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Angelica, for kind of giving what your story has looked like and all the different experiences that you had, sharing a little bit about your neuroscience research, and kind of giving a perspective, especially for high school students, of what it can be like to start to pursue a career in STEM or just explore science in general. Because I'm sure for both of you, right, it's this curiosity about the world that inspired the two of you to become scientists in the first place. So we will take questions. So if either of you, anyone in the Zoom right now, if you have questions, feel free to share them in the chat. It looks like currently there aren't any, but I will start off with a few. So yeah, for either of you, did you face any challenges, whether that was in your undergrad or graduate school, and how did you overcome them, as you were pursuing your career in your field? Loaded question, perhaps, because science isn't easy, but if anyone wants to take it, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can go first. Yeah, there were definitely a lot of challenges along the way. I think, at least for me, first finding out what I actually wanted to spend my time doing research and studying was a challenge that kind of took me a while to figure out. But even when I started at my small math and engineering science school, it was actually a huge culture shock, because I felt it was such a small school, and a lot of the students already had such a deep knowledge in terms of already knowing how to program and already knowing how to do robotics and already knowing how to do so many different skills. Whereas I always felt like I was just someone who kind of only knew what was in the textbooks, and that was about it. I didn't really have any hard engineering skills. So that was a huge challenge for me, trying to build up those skills to sort of catch up in a way to my classmates. But I guess my piece of advice for dealing with that type of issue is to really just believe in yourself. And as long as you believe in yourself and put in the work, you will make it through. And if you are lacking some confidence, again, it kind of comes back to community. Always try to find those people who are really positive and who can support you, that can help you through those hard times, especially if you're studying math and engineering. It can really be challenging at times. And as long as you have that group of friends, or maybe that professor or research group that you can sort of come back to get support, that helps you kind of keep your hopes up and keep your spirit up as you go through the process.
Yeah, so I think I will echo what Angelica said about community, because having that support system is very important, since these paths aren't easy. At the end of the day, you will face a lot of stress mentally and emotionally, and physically at times too. So just make sure you have the right people beside you. You will end up facing experiences probably where you're not in an environment that's conducive to personal growth, really. I faced environments where it was honestly just kind of toxic. And so you need to know, how much you get out of each experience versus how much you're kind of being hurt by each experience. Weigh out, your ambition versus how much mental and emotional damage is happening to you at that time. And hopefully that's not too scary of a thought. But for me, I've been stressed out a lot, and I've become resilient to stress at this point. But I will say that the hardest thing is always, well, for me, has always just been knowing when is the right time to say, okay, I've done enough. It's time for me to move on and grow in other ways, whether through it's a different experience or, just for my own kind of personal health. maybe that was a bit too big, but hopefully it helps.
Yeah, and maybe on a sort of smaller scale, like, if you're doing this research or if you're taking a lot of classes that are related to STEM, always asking for help and asking for advice goes a long way. Like, never be afraid. Like, you don't have to feel like you have to figure out everything on your own. I think, being able to understand where you have an issue and then seeking help to address that really goes a long way as well. And it also helps build your community and it gives you confidence. So never be afraid to just put yourself out there.
Oh, and I will say that, echoing off that point, find your mentors. You'll know when it's right when you find the right mentor, because they'll be the ones to advocate for you. They'll be there to support you whenever you need. And honestly, as Angelica said, stay connected, because you will end up asking them for maybe a recommendation letter or something like that, or just advice in general in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting having done this panel, different sets of like scientists or people in STEM for the last few months, like this sort of theme of like the importance of community when like doing STEM, work or working in the STEM field, being really important. It has been like a continuing sort of trend throughout, hearing like all these various scientists, engineers, mathematicians speak. So my question is, how did your particular community or campus involvement look like, whether that was in your undergrad or your graduate school or even currently? Like, what did your communities back then and now kind of look like, and how did that contribute to your personal and professional development?
So I guess I can go first this time, since Angelica went first last time. But for me, campus involvement was typically through the Filipino community, having strong friends there, just because I could always connect with them in terms of culture, ways we grew up and stuff like that. And it doesn't just have to be people within the same field as you. Honestly, it's nice talking to someone who doesn't understand your work at all. But yeah, when it came to other things, I was also part of the undergraduate research journal. So I had my community there of like-minded people who wanted to help build the research community at my college. And then apart from that, you have your lab also, if you end up joining a lab. For me, I was really lucky in the people that I worked with, because I was typically always the youngest, and I always had a good group of people surrounding me who I ended up essentially calling like my sisters or like my brothers, stuff like that. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to get a lot of opportunities early on that helped me grow and succeed in further endeavors. So yeah, another advice I would say is, when you see an opportunity opening up for you, take it if you think it's right.
Yeah, I guess in terms of communities, yeah, in college I was part of a lot of like different clubs as well. And I think, yeah, even like the one of the organizations that I really spent a lot of time in, Engineers Without Borders, it has nothing to do with research really, but it was really a great community of people where we came together, did a really big project, and learned different skills and became really close just from being able to accomplish a big project together. So that was really cool. And I guess professionally, even though like I'm not in school anymore, there's still a lot of organizations that I can be part of. And from those organizations, like I've met a lot of different people, and through meeting those people, I found new opportunities as well that I've pursued in different ways. So even if you're not in school or even outside of school, like there's a lot of things out there that you could really leverage to find opportunities to learn new things.
Yeah, great. And my next question for both of you is sort of like kind of imagining like what happens after school, like when you're done studying all the science stuff, doing all this research stuff. I know you're still currently in your program, John, but sort of like if you could share, like, what does an MD, PhD do after they're done with their program? I think all of us can kind of imagine sort of, oh, a traditional doctor, you like work at the hospital, you have some kind of specialization in your field and you treat patients and stuff like that. But what makes an MD, PhD different? And then after that, my question for you, Angelica, is what was it like working in industry? I know you had experience doing academic research as well. So how did you end up in industry, and what is it like working as a scientist in industry? So yeah, if you want to go first, John.
So I still got a while left. Probably about 15 years till I get to that point. But what it looked like for me as a future physician scientist is essentially we tend to take this split of 80-20, 80% research, 20% in the clinic. So 1 day a week we see patients, and then the rest of the time is devoted to research. What I hope to end up doing is being able to take my own patients' samples and then work with them in the lab to find what therapies are right for them in terms of which ones are most effective, but also which ones provide the greatest quality of life. So, when we have cancer per se, we could take tumor samples back to the lab and then test a whole bunch of different drugs and see what works the most effective way. That's something I could do, but we'll see how my path changes throughout the next 15 years or so.
And I guess maybe just to build on that, in my experience in industry, like there are actually a lot of MD PhDs. What ends up happening is that, for example, like the MD PhD type of folks, because of their combination of experiences, they actually end up like becoming the vice president of, the research division, or even at my current company, it was founded by a bunch of MD PhDs. So they, instead of opening academic lab, they actually founded their own company, which is still related to research. So there's a lot of options, when you have that type of training. So yeah, I guess my experience in industry, I honestly, kind of came into industry by accident, because that one job I applied to, my first job, it was just more of, because I thought I should apply to a job, and I just found a job that sounded cool to me and it was interesting in terms of the research, but I never expected to actually get a job offer. Just because I had my mindset already on doing like graduate studies and doing a PhD. But then after I got that job offer, I was like, oh, like maybe I should just try it for a couple of years. And then the couple of years turned into almost 10 years. So that's kind of what happened. But, industry is very different than academia. In industry, you really have to work for these companies, and the projects are in a way constrained by the business profile of that particular company. So for example, if you're working at a pharma company, the projects that they're working on are towards developing a pharmaceutical drug. It's not like you can go off and explore like a very deep scientific basic question in industry. You have to really have your eye on being part of the product development process. But because it is, at least in my field, is neuroscience, and there's still not a lot really that's well understood about the brain. There's still kind of a combination of developing a product as well as doing some basic research to answer some questions that are related to sort of the function of that particular drug. So there's still a little bit of basic research that's mixed in there as well. But like in industry, a lot of projects change, or maybe you're only doing a project for maybe 3 to 5 years, whereas in academia, you're probably doing a project or a line of scientific pursuit for a decade or more to really dive deeper and deeper into the scientific questions. But looking back at the end of the day, I think for this modern day and age, just doing that PhD training is always a good idea. Like you'll never really go wrong doing a PhD. Of course, you kind of miss some of that early work experience, or even maybe you might even say making money in your early 20s. But at the end of the day, the people who do PhDs can go further in their careers, and they also have a really deep training in their field that that they could apply to a lot of different problems. So don't be afraid of doing too much school, to be honest. And I feel like as you like when you get older, for those who are in high school, like when you get older and you pursue graduate studies, maybe after college, like the people who are like-minded as you, or like those other cool nerds, like you'll kind of find them in graduate school. So don't be afraid of like doing too much school, because you're going to be working for the rest of your life, really. And have like building that community and getting that really like deep training within that scientific or engineering or math field really pays off, like if you do it when you're younger. That's kind of one of my big lessons as well. But working in industry, like there's still a lot of career options, and you can still learn a lot of different things. But if you have really focused training in the beginning, I think that it helps a lot, because at least in my experience, I've been really I guess like focused on really trying to be careful, like which jobs I choose and which groups to be part of, because I wanted to continue learning. I know some people who are in industry where they just kind of do a lot of different things and it doesn't really add up to a whole lot, because they're kind of bouncing around different companies and bouncing around different kinds of science. That's one of the downsides, I guess. Like there's not really like a clear like training. You have to be really careful in what skills you're developing if you're in industry, because you're kind of on your own in a way.
Yes, and since we don't have any other questions from the audience, I do have one last final question for our panelists tonight, to sort of end on a kind of inspirational note of sorts. Despite all of the stress and the hardship and the challenges of pursuing a career in STEM, being in really rigorous programs and, working and doing research in industry, what do you enjoy most about the field? Like what are the small things that are like, dang, I'm stressed out, but, like, this is why I'm still here. This is why I still continue to, go into the lab or like go to work every day. So yeah, what is it that keeps you going? What do you enjoy the most about your field?
I guess I can go first this time. So I guess what I enjoy about my field is that it's in neuroscience. There, again, like I said before, there's so much that's not really well understood about the brain, and there's so many different brain disorders that have maybe no treatment, or the current treatment paradigm, it doesn't quite address like the actual disorder. Like, it might just treat the symptoms, but it's not actually curing the disease. I think what's cool about neuroscience is that, by doing this research and by being part of some of these companies in my past career, developing treatments, is that you're actually actively trying to help patients. I think at the end of the day, that's really what inspires me, is that you're doing this research that will have an impact on somebody, hopefully in the future, having a positive impact, whether it's, improving their disease condition or actually curing their disease condition. And I guess like, for neuroscience, for me, I was really just inspired by, some people in my family that had, like certain brain disorders. And I always thought, what can I do to really help these people and provide something that can make their life better? And I guess by being in industry, like it's working toward that actively. I guess you can say in a way, sometimes with academia, it's all about publishing papers. It's really cool science, but the idea of helping someone down the line is sometimes a little bit not super clear. Whereas in industry, like you're really making a product that might be in the market, like within the next like 10 years, that could be helping somebody.
So I think for me as a physician scientist, it's kind of the same idea of, in the end of the day, your goal is to help patients. When I see patients in a clinic, you end up getting to know their story, know what they've been going through, all their hardships, all their ups and downs. And that really inspires me to kind of do better for them. Since when we talk about cancer, it's still a very devastating disease, but in the last 10 years alone, we've progressed so much. In the field that I'm working with, immunology and applying immune cells for therapy against cancer, we've seen patients who keep failing their therapies end up being cured. And this to me is a sign that we could keep going forward and make innovations happen. So for me, the inspiration comes from seeing patients in the clinic and getting to know them and their stories, And, picturing that, 5 to 10 years down the line, my research can help inform, other patients like them. And hopefully the goal is to either cure their disease or at least make it more manageable or less painful, less side effects, so on and so forth, so that they both have an extension of life and a better quality of life. So when you see patients in the clinic, that's the inspiring part of me, for me anyway.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, Angelica. It was great having the both of you on with us tonight. It's amazing to see how your work has impacted people's lives in the world that we live in at large. So yes, that concludes our program tonight. For other programs like this, you can visit the library's website for more information. So thank you again, everyone, and I hope all of you have a good evening.